2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi class, welcome to Drama Module 1.1, an introduction to one of the most popular works of all time. No. Hamlet. It's hopefully not going too far to call Hamlet a cultural institution. As you can see, there are as many variations to this text as your mind can create. Besides multiple film adaptations, there have also been constant productions of the play on stage. Musicals, young adult novels, choose-your-own-adventure, graphic novels funded by Kickstarter, anime, parody, zombies. We can further test its cultural relevancy by pointing out that most people can already quote Hamlet. To be or not to be, to thine own self be true, get thee to a nunnery, though this be madness, yet there is method to it, which of course is more commonly phrased as there's a method to the madness. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, probably Mr. Clark's favorite. What a piece of work is man. Brevity is the soul of wit. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Now, as you'll note on that last slide, there's a lot of skepticism and strangeness to the speakers of many of those quotes. Many of them are spoken by wise men who are actually idiots. Some are spoken by idiots who are actually wise men. Some are spoken by people pretending to be idiots, who may actually be wise men but may actually be idiots. And don't even get me started on the crazy people. So many crazy people. Remember how I told you to thine own self be true was spoken by an idiot? Well, no one told these people. Can't even tell what part of the body that is. I'm going to give you a short introduction on how to read Shakespeare and how to read drama in general. And then after that, you're going to go right into reading the play. Preferably in a small group with your friends. But if you're more the introspective type, feel free to read it on your own. Just bear in mind, Shakespeare was written for performance. It is a play. It is a drama. It is intended to be performed and viewed and listened to by an audience. Reading it is hard. Most of the jokes, most of the nuance, most of the irony gets lost when you try to read it unless you are an experienced reader of Shakespeare, which you're probably not. I'm going to start first with a couple of tips about reading Shakespeare. First is that Shakespeare liked to invert and alter the forms of his writing. Most of the time, Shakespeare wrote in something called blank verse. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. You remember iambic pentameter. Somebody talked to you about it back in 9th grade when you read Romeo and Juliet. And iambic pentameter is the use of iambs, which are two-syllable feet. No, not feet. Yeah. Two-syllable feet repeated 5 times, hence penta, per line. This means that every line of poetic Shakespeare has 10 syllables, except for those that don't. The guy wrote 37 plays after all. Every now and then, he threw in an extra syllable or took one away because he had to. Sometimes the words just don't work out the way you want them to. But the vast majority of Shakespeare's writing is in iambic pentameter, and blank verse is his most common form, the unrhymed form of iambic pentameter. Too much rhyming poetry in your playwriting makes you start to sound sing-songy, and that's not an effect you necessarily want. So keep in mind that inversion is what helps Shakespeare maintain his iambic pentameter. Inversion means that your subject, verb, and object, the necessary components of any sentence, are not always in the order that we would expect them to be in. It's sort of like Yoda speak, if Yoda wasn't a puppet and used a lot of really big words all the time. So the sentence, I gave the 7th grader a wedgie, could be written by Shakespeare as, the 7th grader, I gave a wedgie I gave the 7th grader, the 7th grader a wedgie I gave, the 7th grader gave I a wedgie. Now this last one is the most difficult. The 7th grader gave I a wedgie makes it sound like the 7th grader gave you the wedgie or gave me the wedgie. Of course this is impossible because 7th graders can't do that. They're wimps. It's also impossible because we should remember that I is a nominative pronoun. I performs actions. I doesn't have actions performed on it. Therefore, regardless of sentence order, the 7th grader gave I a wedgie still means I gave the 7th grader a wedgie, or 7th graders. Another important aspect of reading Shakespeare is to remember that Shakespeare wrote story. As when you read poetry, when you read Shakespeare, pay attention to the punctuation. Don't just randomly pause at the end of every line because there's space on the page. Stop at periods. Use them as logical breaks. Don't use commas for that. In Hamlet, the guards encounter a ghost, spoiler alert, and one suggests that we do it wrong, being so majestical, to offer it the show of violence. If you're over-pausing every time you come to the end of a line, or over-pausing every time you come to a comma, that sentence doesn't make sense. But if you read it the way it's intended to be read, as a human being speaking a sentence, we do it wrong being so majestical to offer it show of violence, makes much more sense. And finally, and I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but it's important to remember that Shakespeare's vocabulary was probably much larger than yours and mine. Sure, he made up some words, but not out of nowhere. He turned verbs into nouns. He turned adjectives into verbs. He saw gaps in the English language that needed filling, and he filled them. Very few people walked away from his plays not knowing what a specific word meant. And so, absent good acting, we're left with just words, which can become difficult when we don't always know what they mean. This isn't Shakespeare's fault. If you're reading his play and you don't know what's going on because the language has left you behind, you need to get a thesaurus, or a dictionary, or Google. Keep in mind, the vast majority of his audience were penny-paying groundlings who were illiterate, uneducated pig herders. They probably didn't understand most of those words either, but within the context of the play, they could figure out enough of what was being said to understand the goings-on of the action. So that brings us to this final point. Don't get overly caught up in not understanding what a single line means, or a single phrase means, or a single word means. Read through the difficult parts. Through context, their meaning will probably be made clear. If you didn't understand a single word, that probably isn't going to make or break your understanding of the play as a whole, so don't worry about it. And now a couple of terms that you need to know as you read and discuss drama. A monologue is an extended speech delivered by one character to other characters who are on the stage. Mono means... and log essentially means to talk. A soliloquy is a monologue delivered only to the audience, nobody else on stage. It is entirely for the benefit of the audience that a soliloquy is delivered. It gives us insight to the minds of the characters. An aside is a break in the fourth wall, wherein a character who is in mid-conversation with their friend turns to the audience suddenly and says something that only the audience can hear. Since most plays don't have interjecting narration, we don't always know what's going on in their heads without them actually saying it to us. The most important term that we're going to cover for Hamlet is foils. Foils are two characters presented in opposition to each other in order to emphasize and accentuate the differences in those two characters. Think back to Romeo and Juliet. Romeo is a character governed by love and passion. Tybalt is a Capulet who loves to fight. Their presence on the same stage together shows Romeo to be even more lovey-dovey and Tybalt to be even more wantonly violent. And sure enough, eventually they fight. The outcome of this kind of conflict between two foils can say something to us about the message of the text. There certainly is something positive about Romeo defeating Tybalt. We might suggest that it's love conquering over hate, although of course the end result is that Romeo is then banished from Verona and through a series of unfortunate events ends up taking his own life because of that banishment. But at least for a moment it seemed that love triumphed, though the end result of the play suggests a darker message, that passion and love maybe aren't enough to conquer the hate of man. Although some people argue that the building of the statues by the Montagues and the Capulets at the end in honor of Romeo and Juliet and the setting aside of their differences does mark the end of the Capulet-Montague feud, and therefore Romeo and Juliet's deaths were okay? That's enough for me for now. You've got the play to read with your group. Don't forget to go to Edline and download the study questions. The best thing to do is to stop after each act with your group and discuss those questions and answer them as a group. Although keep in mind you can always do them individually. And don't forget to download a novel sheet as well from Edline and fill it out for Hamlet. When you've finished reading the play, there are 2 more videos that I want you to watch. But they're not by me. I'm going to turn you over to John Green.
Hi, I'm John Green. Welcome to Crash Course Literature. You can tell that I'm an English teacher because I'm wearing a sweater, but you can tell that I'm the kind of English teacher who wants to be your friend because I'm wearing awesome sneakers.
At least my life hasn't devolved into a parody of itself. Who is much better at this than I am, the making videos thing, and the writing books thing, and composing funny tweets about soccer, and hobnobbing with celebrities, and starting massive online movements based on his videos. Okay, he's a lot better at a lot of things than me. You'll watch his 2 crash course videos on Hamlet and its meanings and themes. Don't forget that we will be writing an FRQ and taking a test on this text. Good luck!